So I recently watched The Nun 2, and let me just read to you my brief Letterboxd review of it. This film is quite literally all the things that plague the Conjuring universe packed into one painstaking runtime. We have characters with no discernible arcs or development, weightless emotion, tenseless drama, predictable and lackluster jump scares being the basis of all the scares, horrid cinematography full of dark and ugly shots, weak material for the actors to work with, pointless side characters, unsatisfying conclusion, cowardly kills with no risk in their depiction of violence, and a villain with zero presence that's defeated entirely too easily with a mood board style resolution. Genuinely the most lackluster experience you could engage in. Worst film of the year, and I spent the whole time wishing I could remove my eyes like Saint Lucy to make it go away. And I think that essentially sums up my feelings on most of the Conjuring universe. See, as a permanent resident of the horror fandom, I can honestly say that it's not always been the case. I actually didn't like horror at all for a very long time, because back in 2013, when little Crit was 12 years old, a little known film called The Conjuring came out. And I'd say that in general, most people get into horror when they're teenagers. They watch a few scary movies on Halloween with their friends or something because you're now too old for trick-or-treating, and it either sticks with you or it doesn't. And for me, it didn't, because you see, The Conjuring was such an unabashed success, it spawned an entire universe of movies which became the most successful thing in horror my entire teen years. So every Halloween when it came to watch horror movies with my friends, I'll give you 8 guesses on which they picked. So every year I had to endure another awful Conjuring sequel, and it's no secret to anybody that these movies on an astonishing average are complete tripe. But despite that, during the 2010s, 4 out of the top 10 most successful horror films are from this series, more than any other series by far. In fact, for every year there was a Conjuring universe film, it made it into the top 4 grossing horror movies of that year if it was not number 1. They ran horror for the decade, and all off the back of one good film. My disdain for these films has been documented a lot, but being honest, I actually quite love the first film. It's really good. Now, the secret sauce this film has that the others just don't, except The Conjuring 2, is a man named James Wan. The same James Wan who directed Saw 9 years before and changed the industry for his first time. Made on a uni student's weekly shop budget, it was completely revolutionary and inspired a decade's worth of gore for gore's sake body horror films that were cheap imitations that paled in comparison to the real thing inside the franchise and not. Because this is James Wan's superpower as a director. He makes something remarkable, fresh and new, and then for years afterwards, even within the self-contained franchise, there is multiple attempts to recreate that magic. But they can't do it because they try to do it without understanding even in the slightest why the original was special at all. Because like I said, The Conjuring is quite fantastic. For example, Wan really understands the jump scare. He uses them very efficiently. The best use of a jump scare is when you aren't expecting it, which seems obvious, but for most directors, that isn't that obvious. Also, the scare should stay with you. It shouldn't just shock you and then it's over. The effect should last because it should actually scare you. Most directors are so focused on the jump part that they forget the scare part, like the Darth Maul scare in Wan's Insidious. But when working with directors who don't understand how to use a jump scare correctly, they do the typical make everything quiet, rise the music slightly, turn the camera slowly for a reveal, cut the music off and then boo. It's such a tired format that has been endlessly recycled, and because of the success of the series, every mainstream horror near enough decided to jump onto the same train. So this insistence on cheap jump scares became a plague throughout horror films, no help by Insidious by James Wan also. This is mainly a mainstream problem, of course, and that even led to this belief that jump scares are a bad thing and that they're lazy and cheap, which they aren't at all. The use of them has just been cheaply manufactured for so long that people have forgotten how effective and useful they can be as a tool. And this is just one major thing that the Conjuring universe has infected the genre with. Other things are like very loose plots, which again spawns from the very first film, but like most every Wan film, they have a very tight but simple plot. One is like James Cameron in that way. They both use very simple ideas and push them to their most effectiveness, milking the concepts and characters for every single drop of value they have. The sequels, and thus horror in general, decided to take the wrong lessons from this and have very simple and plain plots, which in turn just made everything feel so uncompelling. Another thing is bland and dark cinematography. Mainstream horror used to be beautiful. The aesthetics of Carrie, The Exorcist, The Thing, The Fly, Halloween, and so many others on average were also diverse and used their mise-en-scene, color grading, lighting, and set design to create creepy and horrifying atmosphere. It's so easy to look at iconic sequences from old horror films and just see how visually stunning and well composed they are, even in randomly selected scenes from the same films, compared to iconic scenes from modern horror that clearly takes inspiration from the Conjuring universe that are just drab. It hurts. They're dark and hard to see. It's cheap, not a style, and I could honestly go on and on and on about how much horror has taken from The Conjuring and ran with it in a complete soulless imitation, but it would frankly be too depressing. Because at the end of the day, horror is a trend-based genre. It always has been. There was the monster movies that dominated, there were the slasher franchise craze of the 70s and 80s, the sci-fi practical effects trend, the 90s and 2000s teen slasher trend, the found footage trend, the torture porn trend, and then since The Conjuring, ghosts, possessions, and hauntings have run the genre ridiculously. And ultimately, James Wan, for all his artistry, is a victim of his own genius. He creates these films time and time again that are so unique and refreshing that audiences flock to them, and then the rest of the industry feel they have no choice but to follow suit, but a fundamental misunderstanding of a unique idea always comes across as colourless parody, which causes new minds with new concepts like James Wan himself to come through and reinvent again, and this goes on in an endless cycle of unoriginality forcing originality. I call it the James Wan effect, where a brilliant horror film comes out, inspires a bunch of sequels and follow the leader inspired ripoffs, which puts the genre in a rut before a new unique and brilliant film comes out to take it out said rut, and then it goes on forever and ever, going back and forth. It's a cycle that has been repeated since the beginning of horror, but I think James Wan is the man that has seemingly done this single-handedly multiple times, which is quite impressive. And we're in desperate need of him or somebody else to do it again, because horror has been amazing lately, but we're still being infected by these Conjuring-inspired films, and they need to die out and let something else take over. It'll be interesting to see the legacy of Malignant, which was Wan's last great effort as a director, which in my opinion is some of his best work. But that's just me. What do you guys think of the effect and the Conjuring films? What do you think of James Wan? Let me know on whether it's a Conjuring universe film or not. As always, keep watching movies.